Forget everything Hollywood taught you about winter on the frontier. Real cowboys didn't huddle around roaring campfires in pristine wool coats. They fought a brutal, freezing war against temperatures that could kill a man in hours, armed with tricks so desperate and ingenious that modern survival experts still can't believe they worked. These weren't romantic tales of the Old West. These were raw, visceral methods born from necessity, secrets that separated the living from the frozen corpses found come spring thaw. Today, we're uncovering 16 forgotten survival techniques that kept cowboys breathing when winter turned the frontier into a frozen killing ground, and number 1 saved more lives than any gun ever did. Number 16, the grease coating method, the skin saver that smelled like death. Picture a cowboy spreading thick, rancid animal fat across his exposed face and hands before riding into a blizzard. The stench was unbearable. The texture was revolting, but it saved fingers, noses, and ears from frostbite that would otherwise require amputation. The grease coating method wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. Cowboys learned this trick from mountain men and trappers who'd been using it since the 1820s. The technique was brutally simple. After butchering cattle or game, they'd render the fat into tallow, sometimes mixing it with pine resin or beeswax to improve consistency. Before exposure to extreme cold, they'd slather this mixture onto every exposed inch of skin, creating a protective barrier against wind and freezing temperatures. The science behind it was sound, even if they didn't understand it. The fat layer prevented moisture loss and provided insulation, keeping skin temperature just high enough to avoid tissue damage. Trail bosses on winter cattle drives mandated this practice after watching too many young cowboys lose fingers to frostbite during their first season. The mixture had to be reapplied every few hours, especially around the face where breathing created moisture that could freeze. Cowboys carried small tins of the stuff in their saddlebags, checking each other's faces for the telltale white patches of frostbite forming beneath the grease. It was disgusting. It attracted flies during warmer moments, and it made everything you touched slippery. But when temperatures dropped to 20 below zero, vanity died fast. The men who refused to use it often ended their first winter with blackened fingers or missing earlobes. Number 15, the belly warmer stone, the life-saving ember carrier. Imagine holding your life in your hands, not as a gun, but as a heated rock wrapped in cloth, pressed against your core while you slept in temperatures cold enough to stop your heart. The belly warmer stone was a piece of survival technology so old it predated the American frontier, yet it remained essential through the 1880s. Cowboys would select smooth river stones, roughly the size of a large potato, and heat them in the campfire for hours until they were scorching hot. These weren't just any rocks. Certain stones would explode when heated, sending shrapnel into a man's face. Trail-hardened cowboys knew to test rocks first with a few drops of water. If the water danced and evaporated, the stone was safe. If it cracked or popped, they'd toss it and find another. Once properly heated, the stone got wrapped in layers of cloth, often old shirts or blankets damaged beyond other use. The wrapped stone then went inside a cowboy's bedroll positioned at the core of his body. This wasn't for comfort. This was to prevent hypothermia during brutal Great Plains nights where temperatures could drop to 40 below zero with wind chill. The human body loses heat rapidly from the core, and once core temperature drops too low, you simply don't wake up. The heated stone provided hours of warmth, radiating heat throughout the bedroll and keeping internal organs functioning through the darkest, coldest hours before dawn. Cowboys on watch duty would rotate stones, keeping several heating in the fire at all times. When your watch ended, you'd grab a fresh hot stone and dive into your bedroll. During the worst winter storms, these stones meant the difference between waking up and becoming another statistic on a frozen trail. Number 14, the snow shelter technique, the igloo that saved the cattle trails. What do you get when a Texas cowboy faces a Dakota blizzard with nothing but his horse and a shovel? A snow shelter that kept him alive when his campfire died and his bedroll froze solid. The technique came to American cowboys through native tribes and Canadian trappers. When a blizzard hit suddenly, cowboys had minutes to act. Using whatever tools were available, a saddle, a piece of wood, bare hands, the cowboy would dig into a drift, creating a tunnel entrance that opened into a larger hollow. The entrance had to be lower than the sleeping area, creating a cold trap where the heaviest, coldest air would settle while warmer air stayed in the sleeping chamber. The packed snow created an insulated dome that could maintain temperatures 20 to 30 degrees warmer than outside, even without fire. Historical accounts from the 1870s describe trail crews surviving 3 and 4 days inside these shelters after storms that killed cattle by the hundreds. Panic killed men faster than cold. Number 13. The wool fat treatment, the waterproofing secret that defied logic. Picture soaking your only winter coat in liquid sheep fat until it's so saturated it feels like wearing a slick, oily second skin. Sounds insane. But this wool fat treatment created waterproof clothing that kept cowboys dry in sleet, snow, and freezing rain when a single soaking could mean death. This technique originated with Scottish and Irish immigrants who brought traditional methods from the old country. Lanolin, the natural oil in sheep's wool, has incredible water-repelling properties. Cowboys learned to harvest this fat during shearing season, rendering it down into a workable liquid. They'd heat the lanolin until it became thin enough to penetrate fabric, then submerge their wool coats, vests, and pants in the mixture. The lanolin would soak deep into the wool fibers, creating a natural waterproof barrier that lasted for months. The treated clothing felt heavy and strange at first, with a distinctive, pungent odor that marked a man as someone who knew what he was doing. But when freezing rain turned to ice on everyone else's coats, the lanolin-treated wool shed water like a duck's back. The wearer stayed dry and, more importantly, stayed warm. Wet clothing in winter wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a death sentence. Water conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than air. A cowboy caught in freezing rain with untreated clothing could develop hypothermia in under an hour. The lanolin treatment prevented this heat loss, maintaining the wool's insulating properties even in the worst weather. Cowboys would retreat the garments every season, often gathering around the ranch house in late fall to prepare their winter gear. It was smelly work that stained hands yellow and made everything taste like sheep for days afterward. But every winter, the men wearing treated wool came back alive. Number 12, the charcoal boot dryer, the toe-saving ritual nobody remembers. Imagine your only pair of boots frozen solid, stiff as boards, while you're 2 weeks from the nearest town and temperatures are still dropping. The charcoal boot dryer was an ingenious solution that saved toes, feet, and lives across the frozen frontier. Wet boots in winter were a catastrophic problem. Once leather froze, forcing your foot inside could crack the material, rendering the boot useless. Worse, wearing damp or frozen boots led directly to frostbite and trench foot, conditions that crippled and killed more cowboys than gunfights ever did. The charcoal method solved this through controlled, dry heat. Cowboys would burn wood down to pure charcoal, then carefully place hot coals into a metal container, often an old canteen or tin can. This container went inside the boot, not touching the leather directly, but suspended with sticks or wire. The charcoal produced steady, even heat without flame, slowly warming and drying the leather from the inside out. The process took hours and required constant monitoring. Too much heat would crack and shrink the leather. Too little meant damp boots come morning. Experienced cowboys could judge the temperature by holding their hand near the boot. If they could hold it there for a slow count to 5, the heat was right. The coals had to be changed several times through the night, especially during the coldest months when a single pair of boots might take 8 hours to fully dry. Cowboys on night watch took responsibility for this ritual, checking everyone's boots and rotating the coals. It was tedious, unglamorous work that never made it into dime novels or campfire stories. But in the brutal winters of the 1870s and 80s, those dry boots meant the difference between walking into spring or losing your feet to gangrene. Modern historians examining frontier medical records found frostbite injuries dropped dramatically in crews that practiced disciplined boot maintenance. Number 11, the tobacco poultice, the frostbite cure that sounded like madness. What do you do when a cowboy's fingers turn white, then gray, then black from frostbite and the nearest doctor is 200 miles away? You make a tobacco poultice, pack it onto the dying tissue, and pray it works. This treatment sounds like frontier superstition, something desperate men tried because they had nothing else. Except, it worked, and modern medical research has since discovered why. Cowboys learned this technique from Civil War veterans who'd used tobacco on battlefield wounds. The method was straightforward but disgusting. Chewing tobacco got mixed with whiskey and sometimes hot water to create a thick paste. This paste got packed directly onto frostbitten flesh and wrapped with cloth. The tobacco had to stay moist and warm, requiring frequent replacement of the poultice every few hours. What the cowboys didn't know was that nicotine acts as a vasodilator, opening blood vessels and increasing blood flow to damaged tissue. The warmth and moisture of the poultice prevented further freezing and helped restore circulation to affected areas. Medical journals from the 1890s documented cases where tobacco poultices saved fingers and toes that appeared beyond recovery. The treatment wasn't perfect. Severe frostbite still resulted in amputation. But for moderate cases, where tissue damage wasn't complete, the tobacco paste bought time and promoted healing. Cowboys who knew this trick would check each other's extremities daily during cold snaps, looking for the early white patches that signaled frostbite. Caught early, the tobacco poultice could reverse the damage before it became permanent. The technique fell out of use in the early 20th century as better medical care reached frontier areas, and modern doctors discouraged tobacco use for anything. But for decades, this strange treatment kept cowboys working with all 10 fingers and all 10 toes, able to rope, ride, and earn their wages through winter months that would have crippled them otherwise. Trail bosses often carried extra tobacco specifically for medical use, considering it as essential as ammunition or salt. Number 10. The horse heat method, the controversial technique that sparked fights. Picture a cowboy so cold he's dying, his lips blue, his hands unable to grip, consciousness fading. Then picture him killing a horse, slitting open its belly, and climbing inside the steaming carcass to warm himself. The horse heat method was the most desperate, controversial, and effective cold weather survival technique on the frontier, and it saved lives in circumstances where nothing else would. This method traced back to ancient nomadic tribes but arrived on the American frontier through mountain men and traders familiar with extreme cold survival. The technique was brutally simple. When a man faced imminent death from hypothermia, miles from any shelter in a killing blizzard, he would sacrifice his horse. After shooting the animal, he'd immediately open the body cavity while it was still hot and climb inside, using the horse's body heat to warm himself until the storm passed or help arrived. The internal temperature of a freshly killed horse could exceed 100 degrees, and the massive body held that heat for hours. Historical records document at least a dozen confirmed cases of cowboys surviving blizzards this way between 1860 and 1900. But this technique generated fierce debate among cattlemen and cowboys. Horses were valuable property, often worth more than several months' wages. Killing a horse without absolute certainty of death was considered wasteful and cowardly. Yet those who'd faced true survival situations defended the practice. A dead man couldn't pay for a dead horse anyway. The technique also required split-second decision-making. Wait too long, and you'd lack the strength to perform the butchery. Act too soon, and you'd waste a valuable animal you might not have needed to kill. Cowboys who survived using this method often faced skepticism and accusations of cowardice or poor judgment. But those who'd been there, who'd felt their thoughts slow and their vision narrow as hypothermia took hold, understood. Sometimes survival required terrible choices. The horse heat method was one of them. Number 9. The grease fire starter, the ignition method that never failed. Imagine standing in a blizzard with numb fingers, desperately trying to strike a spark while knowing your life depends on getting fire started in the next few minutes. Matches were worthless when wet. Flint and steel required dexterity that frozen fingers couldn't manage. The grease fire starter solved this problem with frontier ingenuity that bordered on genius. Cowboys would prepare these starters during warmer months, creating what amounted to portable, weatherproof ignition devices. The method involved rendering animal fat and mixing it with dry materials like sawdust, shredded cloth, or pine needles. This mixture got packed into small metal tins or wrapped in waxed cloth. Some cowboys added gunpowder in tiny amounts to ensure ignition. The real innovation was the waterproofing. By sealing the mixture in fat and wax, cowboys created fire starters that remained functional even after being soaked, frozen, or stored for months in saddlebags. When needed, a cowboy would shave or break off a piece of the grease starter and place it in his fire pit. Even with clumsy frozen hands, he could strike a single spark onto this material. The fat would catch and burn hot enough to ignite damp kindling that wouldn't light otherwise. The grease burned slowly and intensely, generating enough heat to overcome moisture in wood and get a proper fire established. Trail crews carried multiple tins of these starters, treating them as essential equipment alongside ammunition and food. The technique was so effective that it remained in use well into the 1920s, even after reliable matches became common. Cowboys trusted redundancy. Matches could get wet or run out. The grease starters simply worked every single time, in any weather. Modern survival experts have rediscovered this frontier technique, finding it superior to many commercial fire starters in extreme conditions. The Cowboys knew what they were doing. Number 8. The layered clothing system, the forgotten insulation science. What separated a living cowboy from a frozen corpse wasn't how thick his coat was, but how he layered his clothing. The frontier layering system was a sophisticated approach to insulation that modern outdoor companies spent decades rediscovering. Cowboys didn't have technical fabrics or synthetic insulation, but they understood the principles of heat retention better than most modern city dwellers. The system worked in stages, each layer serving a specific purpose. Against the skin went a layer of cotton or light wool. This base layer absorbed sweat and moved moisture away from the body. Trapped moisture was a killer in cold weather. Next came a heavier wool layer, usually a union suit or wool pants and shirt. Wool's unique properties allowed it to insulate even when damp, unlike cotton, which lost all insulating value when wet. Over this went a loose-fitting outer layer, often leather or canvas treated with lanolin. This layer broke the wind and shed precipitation while allowing moisture from sweat to escape. The key was airspace. Each layer trapped pockets of air, and air was the actual insulator. Cowboys learned to keep layers loose enough to trap air but not so loose that body heat escaped. They'd adjust throughout the day as activity levels changed. During hard work like roping or branding, they'd remove outer layers to prevent sweating. During rest or riding, they'd bundle up fully. This system allowed for much better temperature regulation than a single heavy coat, which made you sweat during exertion and left you freezing once you stopped moving. Trail diaries from the 1870s describe cowboys shedding and adding layers multiple times daily, a constant adjustment that kept them alive. They carried extra shirts and long underwear in their bedrolls, changing out sweat-soaked garments before they froze solid overnight. The practice seems obvious now, but in an era when many people wore the same clothes for weeks, this disciplined approach to layering represented advanced thinking about thermoregulation and survival. Number 7. The pine needle tea, the scurvy fighter that saved winter camps. Picture a cowboy's gums bleeding, his teeth loosening, his energy vanishing as mysterious illness sweeps through the winter camp. Then picture him brewing a foul-smelling tea from pine needles that somehow reverses the decline and saves the crew. Pine needle tea was the frontier's weapon against scurvy, that killer disease that plagued anyone cut off from fresh vegetables through long winters. Cowboys stuck on winter-lined camps or trailing cattle through northern territories faced months without fresh produce. Salt pork, beans, and hardtack kept you full, but lacked the vital nutrients that kept you healthy. Scurvy would creep in silently, starting with fatigue and weakness, progressing to bleeding gums and loosening teeth, ending in death if untreated. Native tribes and mountain men knew the cure. Pine needles, particularly from white pine, spruce, and fir trees, contained high concentrations of vitamin C. A tea made from fresh needles provided enough of this nutrient to prevent and even reverse scurvy. The preparation was simple but required knowledge. Young needles worked best, gathered from green branches. These got chopped or crushed and steeped in hot water, not boiling water, which destroyed the vitamin content. The resulting tea tasted bitter and resinous, nothing like the pleasant herbal teas of parlors back east. It was medicine, and cowboys drank it as such. Experienced trail bosses mandated this practice during extended winter camps, requiring every man to drink a cup daily whether they felt sick or not. The tea also provided psychological benefits in camps where morale sagged under brutal conditions. The hot liquid, the ritual of preparation, the bitter taste that marked you as someone tough enough to handle it, all contributed to mental resilience. Medical records from frontier military posts show dramatic reductions in scurvy cases once pine needle tea became standard practice in the 1870s and 80s. Cowboys adopted the technique willingly once they saw it work, though few understood the science behind it. They just knew the tree juice kept them healthy and strong when winter tried to kill them. Number 6. The flour sack insulation, the cloth that became armor against cold. Imagine turning empty flour sacks into life-saving insulation that kept your feet, hands, and core warm when everything else failed. The flour sack insulation technique transformed worthless trash into essential survival gear through frontier ingenuity. Flour came to frontier camps and ranches in heavy cotton or canvas sacks that were too useful to discard. Cowboys hoarded these sacks, washing and repurposing them in dozens of ways. During winter, they became critical insulation material. The technique worked through a simple principle. Empty flour sacks got stuffed with dry grass, pine needles, cattail down, or any other dry insulating material available on the frontier. These stuffed sacks then became liners for boots, mittens, vests, or bedrolls. For boots, a cowboy would create a flour sack liner filled with dried grass and slip it inside his boot before putting his foot in. This created an insulating layer that kept feet warm even in the cheapest, thinnest leather boots. The grass compression provided cushioning while the trapped air provided warmth. For hands, sacks became the interior of oversized mittens, creating frontier-style ski mittens decades before skiing reached America. The bulky mittens made fine work impossible, but kept fingers warm enough to function during basic tasks. At night, flour sacks stuffed with grass became additional layers in bedrolls, particularly positioned around the feet and along the back where cold penetrated worst. Some cowboys created entire vests from multiple flour sacks sewn together and stuffed with insulation. These looked ridiculous but worked brilliantly. Historical photographs from the 1880s occasionally show cowboys wearing these strange, puffy garments, looking like ancestors of modern down jackets. The technique required constant maintenance. The stuffing materials would compress and lose effectiveness, requiring replacement every few weeks. Moisture was the enemy, as wet grass or needles provided no insulation. Cowboys had to dry out their sack insulation regularly near the fire, a time-consuming chore that paid dividends in warmth and survival. Modern outdoor historians testing this technique found it surprisingly effective, with stuffed flour sacks providing insulation comparable to early 20th century commercial products. Number 5, the cattle gut windbreaker, the disgusting garment that saved the northern ranges. What do you get when you take cattle intestines, clean them, stretch them, and sew them into a translucent garment? The most effective windbreaker on the frontier, a disgusting but brilliant piece of survival technology that made it possible to work on the northern ranges during winter. This technique arrived with European immigrants familiar with traditional uses for animal intestines. Cowboys initially mocked the practice until they saw how well it worked. The process started after butchering. While most of the animal went to food or leather, the intestines got thoroughly cleaned and scraped to remove all interior material. Then they were stretched on frames to dry, creating translucent, flexible sheets of material remarkably similar to modern waterproof fabrics. These dried gut sheets got sewn together with sinew or strong thread, creating oversized shirts or ponchos. The garments looked bizarre, almost like wearing cloudy glass, and they smelled terrible when new. But they were completely windproof and water-resistant, two properties that made them invaluable in winter. Wind was often more dangerous than cold itself. A temperature of 0 degrees with no wind was survivable with proper clothing. That same temperature with 30-mile-per-hour winds created wind chill equivalent to 30 below, cold enough to cause frostbite in minutes on exposed skin. The cattle gut windbreaker stopped this heat robbery, allowing cowboys to retain body heat even in howling winter gales. Worn over wool layers, these garments created an effective, if strange-looking, cold weather system. The gut material was also surprisingly durable, lasting an entire season with proper care. Cowboys working on ranches in Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas adopted this technique widely in the 1880s and 90s. It spread from immigrant communities to American-born cowboys who recognized superior technology when they saw it. The technique faded only when rubberized and waxed canvas became commercially available in the early 1900s, providing similar wind and water protection without the smell or appearance issues. Number 4, the snow blindness prevention, the crude sunglasses that saved eyesight. Picture waking up in agony, your eyes feeling like they're filled with sand and broken glass, unable to see in bright sunlight reflecting off endless snow. Snow blindness wasn't just painful. It was potentially fatal on the frontier where losing your vision meant losing your ability to survive. Cowboys improvised protective eyewear from available materials. The most common technique involved cutting narrow horizontal slits in pieces of leather, wood, or cloth stiffened with pine resin. These crude goggles reduced light entering the eye while allowing enough vision to navigate. Cowboys blackened the inside surface with charcoal to reduce reflections. Another method involved rubbing charcoal around the eyes, creating black rings that absorbed light and reduced glare. Trail bosses mandated use of protective measures during bright conditions. Men who ignored these precautions became liabilities, requiring care while unable to work. Those too proud to wear strange-looking eye protection sometimes paid with permanent vision damage or death. Number 3, the emergency blood soup, the survival food that tested every man's resolve. Imagine being so cold and hungry that you'd voluntarily drink hot blood mixed with melted snow, knowing it might be the only thing keeping you alive until morning. The emergency blood soup was perhaps the most psychologically difficult survival technique on this list, yet it saved lives when everything else failed. Native tribes had used blood as emergency nutrition for centuries. Mountain men learned the technique during extended winter trapping seasons. When cowboys found themselves in desperate circumstances, cut off from supplies, animals dying from cold, they turned to this extreme measure. The preparation was straightforward but revolting. When an animal died or had to be slaughtered, cowboys would catch the blood in any available container. Mixed with hot water or melted snow, this created a warm, protein-rich liquid that provided immediate energy and warmth. The blood was high in iron and proteins, critically important for cold weather survival. Historical accounts describe the practice with brutal honesty. Men gagged, vomited, and swore, but they drank it anyway because the alternative was death. It's a technique that never made it into romantic frontier mythology, too grim for popular entertainment, but it kept men alive. Number 2, the buffalo chip fire, the fuel source that crossed a continent. What burns hot, stays lit in wind, and can be found scattered across thousands of miles of treeless prairie. Buffalo dung, dried to hardness by sun and wind, became the primary fuel source for cowboys crossing the Great Plains during winter, solving the problem of fire where wood simply didn't exist. Native tribes had used buffalo chips for fuel since ancient times. American cowboys perfected the practice during the great cattle drives of the 1860s through 80s. The technique required knowledge and selection skills. Fresh dung was useless, too wet to burn, but chips dried for weeks became excellent fuel. Cowboys learned to identify good chips by sight, looking for gray-white coloring, brittleness, and thorough drying. The dried chips burned hot and clean with surprisingly little smoke. A fire built from buffalo chips could cook meals, boil water, and provide warmth through long winter nights. The chips burned longer than many woods, holding coals that could be banked overnight and rekindled at dawn. Without buffalo chips, crossing treeless prairie during winter would have been impossible. Trail crews planned routes around chip concentrations as carefully as water sources. This humble fuel source made survival possible in some of the harshest environments on the continent. Number 1, the buddy bedroll system, the technique that saved more lives than any gun. The deadliest threat on the winter frontier wasn't outlaws, hostile tribes, or wild animals. It was the cold, and the single most effective defense against it wasn't a weapon or shelter. It was another human body. The buddy bedroll system saved more lives than any gun ever did through the simple act of sharing body heat during the killing hours before dawn. This practice violated every social norm of the era. Men sleeping in close physical contact raised eyebrows and invited mockery. But the winter frontier didn't care about civilized sensibilities, and cowboys learned that survival required abandoning pride. The technique was brutally simple. 2 cowboys combined their bedrolls, sleeping back to chest in tight formation that maximized heat retention. Both men's body heat warmed the shared space, while doubled blankets provided better insulation. The science was sound. The human body generates roughly 100 watts of thermal energy continuously. In a solo bedroll during extreme cold, most heat escapes. In a shared bedroll, heat gets trapped and concentrated, keeping both men alive. The practice became standard procedure on winter trail drives by the 1870s. Medical records show dramatically lower hypothermia deaths among cowboy crews compared to solitary travelers. The difference was simple. Cowboys used the buddy system. Loners died alone. Outro. 16 techniques born not from books or experts, but from desperate necessity on the frozen frontier. From coating themselves in rancid grease to drinking blood soup, from sleeping with strangers to climbing inside dead horses, cowboys did whatever it took to survive winters that modern people can barely imagine. These weren't the glamorous tales that built the legend of the Wild West. They were the ugly, unglamorous, brutally effective methods that kept real cowboys alive long enough to become legends. Hollywood gave you the fantasy. We've given you the truth, the raw mechanics of how men survived when winter turned the frontier into a killing ground. Every technique on this list was proven in blood and frozen flesh, passed down through generations who learned the hard way that survival didn't care about dignity or comfort. So which technique shocked you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from people who appreciate the real history that most channels ignore. And if you made it this far, you're clearly serious about understanding what the frontier was really like. Subscribe, because we've got more lost history to uncover. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember that the real heroes of the Old West weren't the fast guns. They were the ones who simply refused to die.